She lied. I discovered the truth. Now I'll show her what betrayal really means. The day started like any other, a quiet hum of normalcy that gave no hint of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I was at work, buried in spreadsheets and budgets, the kind of mindless rhythm that makes the hours blur. My phone buzzed. A text from my wife, Elena. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. It wasn't unusual. Elena was a corporate event planner, and her job often required late nights filled with endless details and demanding clients. I texted back something supportive and got on with my day. It was only when I glanced at the clock hours later, long past midnight, that unease began to creep in. Elena still hadn't come home. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I told myself she must have fallen asleep at the office, but the lie didn't sit well. The next morning, when she walked through the door looking disheveled and carrying the scent of expensive cologne that wasn't hers, the unease hardened into suspicion. Long night? I asked, my tone light but my heart heavy. Exhausting, she said, not meeting my eyes. She tossed her keys on the counter and headed straight to the shower. I followed her movements with a growing sense of detachment, like I was watching a scene from someone else's life. This wasn't the first time I'd felt something was off, but it was the first time I couldn't convince myself to ignore it. Later that day, as I sat at my desk pretending to work, I decided I couldn't let it go. Elena had a password-protected laptop, one she always kept with her. But there was something she couldn't hide from me, our shared phone bill. That evening, while she was still in the shower, I logged into our account. My hands trembled as I scanned the call logs, the texts. One number appeared over and over again, often late at night. My chest tightened as I recognized the number. It belonged to Mark. Mark, the head of our company's IT department. Mark, the man who worked on the same floor as I did, who ate lunch with me every Tuesday. My friend. The world tilted, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Betrayal wasn't just something Elena had done to me. It was a web of deceit spun by someone I trusted. And then, like a seed planted in poisoned soil, the first inklings of a plan began to grow. The next morning, the world felt wrong, as though reality itself had been twisted. Elena sat across from me at breakfast, scrolling through her phone, her expression serene. I watched her, every detail now sharpened by suspicion. The way her thumb lingered too long on the screen, the way she avoided looking at me when I spoke. Mark's name echoed in my mind like a curse. How had I missed it? The small smiles between them at company parties, the casual familiarity that had seemed so harmless at the time. I'd laughed off jokes from coworkers who teased me about their camaraderie. They're just work friends, I'd said, blind to the truth staring me in the face. I decided I needed proof, something solid that couldn't be explained away. At work, I found myself watching Mark more closely. He was his usual self, affable, easygoing, and entirely unremarkable. But now, every gesture, every glance he exchanged with Elena in passing seemed laced with hidden meaning. That afternoon, as we sat at our usual Tuesday lunch, I tested the waters. "How's the workload lately?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "Busy as ever. Sometimes it feels like I live here." "Yeah, Elena says the same thing," I said, watching him closely. "She's been putting in a lot of late nights lately." His fork paused halfway to his mouth, just for a fraction of a second. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to set my nerves alight. "She's great at what she does," he said quickly, a little too quickly, before changing the subject to the upcoming office retreat. That night, I waited until Elena had gone to bed before retrieving her phone from the nightstand. She never locked it when she was home. A small gesture of trust that now felt like mockery. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages. There was nothing incriminating in her texts with Mark. The exchanges were professional, their tone sterile. But when I opened her email app, my heart stopped. There it was, buried under a folder labeled Work. Messages that were anything but. They were careful, coy, laden with inside jokes and subtle innuendos. The kind of intimacy that doesn't come from working together but from something much deeper, much more personal. And then I saw it. A confirmation for a hotel booking from last week. The date matched the night she'd come home late. My vision blurred as the truth settled over me like a shroud. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was fact. I replaced the phone and walked out onto the balcony, the cool night air doing nothing to calm the storm inside me. My hands gripped the railing as anger and heartbreak surged in equal measure. But as the initial shock gave way to clarity, I realized something else. If Mark thought he could betray me and walk away unscathed, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The day after my discovery, I couldn't concentrate at work. The office felt smaller, suffocating. Every laugh, every innocuous conversation felt like a secret mocking me. Mark's voice carried from across the room, casual and carefree, as though he hadn't torn my world apart. I knew I couldn't confront him, not yet. Confrontation was easy. What I needed was precision, patience. He had to feel the weight of what he'd done. Elena, too. That evening, I set my plan in motion. "Elena," I said as she stepped through the door, still wearing the pencil skirt and blouse she'd left in that morning. "How about a weekend getaway? We haven't had time for ourselves lately." She froze for a split second, then smiled, her expression almost too eager. "That's a wonderful idea. I've been so swamped with work." Her excitement was a facade. I could see it now. She was calculating, trying to measure if she could rearrange her secret schedule with Mark. "Let me handle the details," I said. "I'll find a cabin somewhere remote. No distractions, just us." She kissed me on the cheek, murmuring something about how sweet I was. But behind her eyes, I caught a flicker of something that looked suspiciously like relief. That night, while she showered, I took the next step. I logged into her email again, this time with a different purpose. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A thread of messages between her and Mark about their next rendezvous. Friday night. Same hotel. Perfect. I forwarded the emails to myself, deleted the sent message, and slipped the phone back onto her nightstand before she could notice. The next few days passed in a haze of rehearsed normalcy. I played the role of the doting husband, and she leaned into it as if trying to convince me, and maybe herself, that nothing was amiss. On Friday morning, I packed my bag and kissed her goodbye as I left for work. "I'll pick you up later for the trip," I told her, my tone light, my smile easy. "Looking forward to it," she said, her lips curving into that same serene smile I now knew was a lie. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I checked into the very hotel she and Mark had chosen for their affair. I paid extra for a room across the hall from theirs. From my perch, I waited. Hours passed. My mind raced with memories of Elena's laughter, her touch, the life we'd built, or so I'd thought. Finally, they arrived. Mark looked around nervously before stepping into the room with Elena. She didn't look back. My hands trembled as I snapped photos of them entering together. Evidence. Proof. But the pictures weren't the endgame. They were just the beginning. I waited in the dimly lit hotel hallway, every nerve alight, my thoughts oscillating between rage and the cold calculation I needed to maintain. My plan wasn't just about catching them, it was about making them pay. Across the hall, the door to their room had closed long ago. I imagined what was happening inside and had to force myself to take a breath. This wasn't the time for fury. Fury made mistakes. I slipped a small device out of my pocket, a voice recorder I'd bought just for this. Leaning against the wall, I adjusted my posture to appear casual as I pressed the device against the seam of their door. Faint voices filtered through, muffled but distinct enough to recognize the betrayal woven into their words. Mark's voice carried first, laughing about how easily they'd evaded suspicion. Then Elena's softer, more playful tone, dripping with a mockery I never thought I'd hear directed at me. "You really think he has no idea?" Mark asked. She laughed, a bitter sound that made my stomach churn. "Gabriel? Please." He couldn't see past his spreadsheets if his life depended on it. It was like a knife in the chest, but I let the pain harden me. Satisfied I had enough, I withdrew the recorder and slipped it into my jacket. Then, taking the second part of my plan out of my bag, I prepared to make my move. It was a set of small envelopes, unassuming but packed with power. Each one contained a copy of the photos I'd taken earlier, along with an anonymous note detailing where they could find more proof of the affair. One was addressed to Mark's wife, who I'd met briefly at a company party. The others were reserved for their supervisors, my own boss, and the office's HR department. I'd already scheduled their delivery through a courier. The fallout would be swift and public. But I wasn't done. At precisely 10 p.m., I sent a message to Elena from a burner phone. "Leave now. Gabriel knows everything." It was short, cryptic, and enough to rattle her. I wanted to see how she'd react. I stayed close to their door, and moments later, I heard the scramble of hurried movements and muffled voices. "Did you tell anyone?" Elena's voice was sharp with panic. "Of course not," Mark snapped. "But we need to go." The door flew open, and I stepped back into the shadows as they rushed past me, their faces pale with fear. Watching them scurry like rats fleeing a sinking ship was almost satisfying enough. Almost. I had more in store for them. I stayed in the shadows of the hallway for a long moment, letting their panic settle into the pit of my stomach like a cold weight. But I wasn't interested in where they were running. I was interested in what came next. Back in my room, I unpacked the tools I had prepared for this night. The photos I had taken, the recordings I'd captured, and the series of carefully written letters. They weren't for Mark's wife or our HR department. Those targets were too simple, too predictable. No, this betrayal needed a stage far more public. I slid the letters into a slim folder and took a taxi to the local newspaper office. It was late, but not too late. I had made arrangements earlier in the day, paying in cash to ensure the anonymous delivery would be handled by a night editor looking for a good story. The envelope was addressed to the editorial desk with a simple note: "For tomorrow's front page." Inside were the damning photos, a written timeline of their affair, and just enough personal detail to ensure credibility. I included only the most damning messages from their email exchanges and a few select excerpts from the recordings. It was enough to make sure their private indiscretions became a very public scandal. When I returned to the hotel, I saw their car was gone from the lot. It didn't matter where they had gone. They wouldn't outrun the chaos. I spent the night wide awake, my mind buzzing with the anticipation of the fallout. The morning would bring the first cracks to the facade they had so carefully constructed. But my plan wasn't just about exposure. No, this was only the first layer of what I had in store. The next morning, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee, the radio tuned to the local news station. I didn't have to wait long. "Our top story today," the announcer began, his voice laced with curiosity. "A shocking scandal involving two prominent professionals in our community. Leaked photos and audio recordings suggest an extramarital affair between Mark Andrews, head of IT at Clybourne Corporation, and Elena Rivera, a well-known corporate event planner." Hearing their names spoken aloud made it real. A small, bitter smile tugged at the corners of my lips. The announcer continued, "The documents anonymously delivered to our office include photographic evidence and messages exchanged between the two. The fallout has already begun, with Andrew's wife filing for divorce early this morning and corporate officials declining to comment. Mark's wife, Laura, hadn't wasted a second. Good. I took a slow sip of my coffee, imagining the chaos that must have erupted in their lives. Mark, scrambling to explain himself at home while facing inevitable repercussions at work. Elena trying to navigate the minefield of exposure and humiliation. But this wasn't enough, not yet. They hadn't felt the full weight of what they'd done. That afternoon, I received a text from Elena. "Gabriel, we need to talk. Please come home." I stared at the screen, a dark satisfaction blooming in my chest. She didn't know what I had done yet. She only knew her perfect little secret was unraveling. When I arrived home, Elena was waiting for me in the living room. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked up as I stepped inside, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had once loved. But then I remembered her laughter with Mark, the way she had mocked me so easily. I don't know how to start," she stammered, her voice trembling. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Then don't. I already know everything." Her expression shifted, panic flashing across her features. "Gabriel, It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. I cut her off, my tone icy. And now the whole city knows too. She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. What are you talking about? I stepped closer, dropping a printout of the front page article onto the coffee table. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, her face draining of color as she read. You did this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Did you think you could betray me and walk away unscathed? I said, my voice low and cold. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? Her hands clenched the paper, her knuckles white. You're insane, she hissed. You've ruined everything. No, Elena, I said, my voice steady. You ruined everything. I'm just returning the favor. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not the fear of being caught, but the fear of what else I might do. And that fear was justified. Elena stood frozen, the newspaper trembling in her hands. I could see the wheels turning in her head, her panic bubbling beneath the surface. She wasn't just worried about her reputation. She was terrified of what else I might have uncovered. Why would you do this? She whispered, her voice trembling. I leaned against the wall, my arms crossed, my tone measured and cold. Why did you do it, Elena? Did you think I wouldn't notice? That I was too blind, too trusting to see the truth? Her face twisted with anger, but it was the desperate anger of someone trying to regain control. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said, her voice rising. Mark and I cut her off with a sharp laugh, the sound harsh in the still room. Don't even try to justify it. You betrayed me, Elena, not just once but repeatedly. And with him, she faltered, her defiance wavering. You don't understand, she began, but her voice cracked, betraying her. Then make me understand, I said, my voice a low growl. Her silence spoke louder than any excuse could have. She turned away, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of her actions had finally hit her. For a moment, I thought she might break down, that she might show some semblance of regret or remorse. But instead, she straightened, the fire returning to her eyes. You think this is over? She said, her voice sharp and defiant. You think you can just ruin my life and walk away? Her audacity stunned me, but it also ignited something darker within me. I stepped closer, towering over her, my voice low and dangerous. You have no idea what's coming next, Elena. You've only seen the beginning. Her defiance faltered again, but she didn't back down. Mark will stand by me, she said, almost as if trying to convince herself. He won't let you destroy me. I laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. Mark, I asked, you think he's your knight in shining armor? He's just as much of a coward as you are. Do you really think he'll sacrifice his career, his marriage, for you? He's probably already looking for a way to throw you under the bus. The words hit their mark. I could see it in the way her confidence wavered, the way her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You're a monster, she spat, but her voice lacked conviction. No, Elena, I said, my voice calm and measured. I'm the man you made me. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with the newspaper still clutched in her trembling hands. My heart was pounding, but not with regret. I felt nothing for her now, no love, no pity, no sympathy. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Elena's words haunted me as I left the house, but not in the way she intended. A monster? No, I wasn't the monster here. I was the reckoning, the balance restored. She was the one who had torn our life apart, brick by brick, thinking I wouldn't notice until it was too late. The next phase of my plan required precision. Mark was the other half of this betrayal, and it was time for him to feel the full weight of his choices. While Elena wallowed in her unraveling lies, I focused on the man who thought he could humiliate me. I parked outside the sleek glass office building where Mark worked, blending into the shadows of the parking lot. He always stayed late on Fridays. I'd heard him brag about it countless times during lunch. A dedicated worker, he called himself. Tonight, that dedication would cost him. When he finally emerged, the weight of the day showing in his slumped shoulders, I slipped out of my car and followed him. He was alone, his tie loosened, his phone pressed to his ear as he barked into it. I trailed him to the far corner of the lot, where his car was parked under a dim streetlight. "Rough day, Mark," I called out. He froze, his head snapping toward me. In the faint light, I saw his face drain of color. He recognized my voice before he even saw my face. "Gabriel," he said, trying to sound casual, but his voice betrayed him. "What are you doing here?" I stepped closer, keeping my movements measured and deliberate. "I thought we should have a chat, man to man." His eyes darted around, searching for an escape. I could almost hear his thoughts racing. "Look, I don't know what you think." "Don't," I interrupted, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't insult me by pretending. I know everything, Mark. The hotel, the emails, the laughs at my expense." He flinched, his body shrinking in on itself. "It's not what you think," he stammered. "Elena and I." I took another step forward, cutting him off. "Save it. I don't care about your excuses." I leaned in, lowering my voice to a cold whisper. "Here's what you need to know. Your wife has the photos. Your boss has the recordings. Your colleagues, they'll know by Monday." His mouth opened and closed, his mind scrambling for a response. "Gabriel, please," he finally managed. "You don't have to do this." I smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of my lips. "Oh, but I do, Mark. You see, this isn't about you anymore. It's about the principle. Actions have consequences, and you're about to learn that firsthand." His phone buzzed in his hand, and I saw the color drain from his face as he glanced at the screen. Likely Laura, his wife, calling after the morning's revelation. I took a step back, letting the silence stretch between us. "You made your bed," I said, my voice calm and even. "Now lie in it." I left him standing there, frozen in the glow of his phone, his world crumbling around him. As I walked away, I felt no guilt, no remorse. The puppeteer's strings had been cut. The following morning, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee as Elena stumbled in. She looked haggard, her face pale and drawn. She avoided my gaze as she poured herself a cup. "Rough night?" I asked, my tone deliberately neutral. She flinched, gripping the mug like a lifeline. "Gabriel, please, can we talk about this?" I leaned back, studying her. "Talk about what, Elena? The affair? The humiliation? Or the mess you've made of both our lives?" Her lip trembled, but I felt nothing. Whatever cracks had appeared in her facade were too little, too late. She started to say something, but I stood and left the room before she could finish. There was nothing more to say, not yet. By noon, the fallout had begun to spread like wildfire. I received a text from a coworker, one of those gossipy types who lived for drama. "Did you hear? Mark's suspended pending investigation. Something about HR complaints and personal conduct." I smirked at the screen. It had started faster than I expected. Mark wouldn't recover from this. The accusations were enough to stain his professional reputation permanently. At home, Elena had gone quiet, retreating to the bedroom. I knew she was trying to come up with a way to salvage what little remained of her life. Let her stew, I thought. This was only the beginning. That evening, the house was heavy with tension. Elena emerged from the bedroom, her face blotchy from crying, but her eyes still carried a spark of defiance. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice shaking but loud. I stayed calm, barely looking up from my laptop. "I'm not doing anything, Elena. I'm just letting the truth come out." "You've ruined me," she screamed. I met her gaze, my tone icy.
No, Elena.
"You ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone saw it." Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked utterly defeated. She had no fight left. The next morning, Elena was gone. Her closet had been emptied, and a hastily scrawled note sat on the kitchen counter. "I can't stay here anymore. You've destroyed everything. Don't contact me." I stared at the note for a moment, feeling no satisfaction, only a cold, hollow calm. She had run just as I expected. It was exactly what I wanted, her out of my life and out of excuses. I crumpled the note and dropped it in the trash. Later that day, I sent the final email. It wasn't to Elena, Mark, or even their families. It was to the local business network, a widely circulated newsletter that often featured community updates. In the email, I provided a brief account of the affair, couched in terms of workplace ethics and integrity. Attached were the photos, the recordings, and a statement urging companies to reconsider their approach to personal conduct policies. I knew it would spread. By Monday, their reputations wouldn't just be damaged. They would be obliterated. This was the closure I needed. By Monday morning, the ripple effects of my actions were everywhere. The newsletter had published the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about workplace misconduct. Social media lit up with comments, speculations, and outrage. Mark officially resigned. Elena's event planning clients began canceling contracts en masse. She became a pariah, her name synonymous with scandal. I sat back and watched it all unfold, detached. There was no satisfaction, no gloating, just a quiet, empty calm. The life we'd built together was gone, replaced by the wreckage of her choices. Weeks passed and the world moved on. Mark and Elena were shadows of their former selves, their lives reduced to whispers and distant scandals. The house was quiet now, almost suffocatingly so. One evening, as I sat in the empty living room, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had consumed me had burned itself out, leaving behind only ash. But with that emptiness came a strange clarity. I wasn't free yet. Revenge hadn't healed me. It had only created new scars. I packed a bag the next morning and left the house behind, driving toward an uncertain future. The wreckage of my old life would stay where it belonged, in the past. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for certain. I was finally moving forward.